Well, good afternoon, everyone, and welcome to our first post-Cabinet press conference for 2026. It has been a tough start to the year for many people who have been impacted by the recent weather event across the North Island. Tragically, we have lost 9 people in the weather event and 1 person remains missing. To the families who have lost their loved ones at Mount Maunganui, Welcome Bay and Warkworth, and the family of a man who is still missing near Opotiki, our hearts and our thoughts are with you all. Over the last few days, Mark Mitchell and I have visited a number of communities across the North Island and seen firsthand the devastation. Some people have lost their homes and their livelihoods, and others have been isolated after major roads have failed. While this weather event is not of the scale of Cyclone Gabrielle in terms of the number of people affected, for those who have been affected, the impact is significant. Our priority right now is finding accommodation for those who have been displaced. I'm advised that there are around 500 people across the North Island who are displaced and assessments are ongoing. Yesterday, the government activated the temporary accommodation service to help those people access temporary housing. We are also focused on getting supplies into communities that are currently cut off while we clear the slips and assess the damage to the roads. State Highway 35 on the east coast and State Highway 25 in the Coromandel have both suffered significant damage and will take some time to repair. Kiwi Rail is also assessing its lines. Health New Zealand is monitoring the impact on the health system and supporting people experiencing mental distress, while the Ministry of Social Development is working with people who need financial support. And so today I'm announcing 3 actions the government is taking in response to this weather event. First, I can announce that the government is making available $1.2 million to support affected regions with immediate and pressing needs through the mayoral relief funds. This is, of course, on top of the annual government contribution that has already been made to this fund. Government contributions to mayoral relief funds provide a valuable mechanism for early mobilisation of financial assistance to communities after an emergency. Local authorities distribute these grants to help people, families and community groups get back on their feet. Across government, assessments are underway in affected regions to establish further need, and we are ready to provide further support as ongoing needs become clearer. A further $1 million will be provided to reimburse marae that have provided welfare in response to this weather event and to allow them to replenish and continue to build their resilience. Marae have been exceptional in the way that they have stepped up to support their communities. They have provided shelter, food and care to people in need, and I cannot speak more highly of them. Mark and I had the privilege of visiting some of these marae in Northland over the weekend. I came away feeling incredibly proud and humbled by the manaakitanga shown by everyone there. There is, of course, existing funding across government to support recovery efforts following natural hazards and weather events. That includes, for example, the Natural Hazards Commission, which has up to $700 million available for claims from this event, the New Zealand Transport Agency, which has over $700 million allocated for emergency work on local roads and state highways. The Ministry for the Environment has $7.2 million to help local authorities clear emergency waste, and the Ministry for Primary Industries Rural Support Trusts have funding to support rural communities. Secondly, I can announce that I have appointed Chris Penk as Associate Minister for Emergency Management and Recovery. The severity of last week's weather means the recovery is going to take some time and will involve many different government agencies. Chris Penk will support Mark Mitchell by leading the coordination of the government's response, with responsibility for bringing together government agencies to ensure a joined-up response. And then finally, as part of his new delegation, I've also asked Chris Penk to bring advice back to Cabinet on the potential scope of a government inquiry into the events at the Mount Maunganui Beachside Holiday Park last Thursday. There are many questions being asked, including whether there was a missed opportunity to evacuate people sooner. 6 families are grieving the unimaginable loss of their loved one, and they deserve answers. I acknowledge that the Tauranga City Council has ordered its own inquiry into the events leading up to the landslide at the campground. However, I do believe there is a strong case for an independent government inquiry, and will be talking to Tauranga City Council about that. Establishing the facts is not only what the families of those who lost their lives deserve, it's also important in helping us to ensure lessons are learned to prevent similar tragedies occurring elsewhere in the future. This afternoon, I will move a motion without notice to allow the House to express our condolences to those who have lost loved ones in the recent weather events. I will then deliver my statement to Parliament outlining the Government's programme for 2026. And with that, Mark, Nicola and I are happy to take your questions. I'm conscious that we're all trying to get into the House for 2 o'clock and you have to do a trial run, but with that, take questions.
Does the decision to seek advice on a potential government inquiry reflect your perhaps concern about the role Tauranga City Council had and their actions on that day and their ability to facilitate a review?
Yes, it's in part to do with that. It's also, that there's potentially an inherent conflict between the ownership of the campground and the council, but it's also coming from conversations directly with families that Mark and I had in the last 48 hours with people in Tauranga at the Mount, and their big desire is to actually understand what did happen here. And I think doing that dispassionately, being able to do that very objectively through an independent government inquiry would be the way forward. Of course, we want to have a conversation with the Mayor, and he'll need to talk obviously with the Council as well about us making sure we come to an accommodation to say let's do one inquiry rather than multiple inquiries, and let's set it up in the right way with the right terms of reference. But my view very strongly is that there's learning here for the rest of New Zealand. There's potentially an inherent conflict between the Council and the council-owned campground, and importantly the families deserve answers.
So you're going to say whether it's Mahe Drysdale or whomever from the Council, if the decision is that the government feels you feel it's warranted to have a review yourselves, there's not much point the council ordering one themselves. Potentially,
I just don't think we want to be. We'll have that conversation. In fairness, it's very early days, but I think we owe it to the families to make sure there's an independent inquiry that they have confidence in, and actually taking that out of the confines of the council, I think would be. Smart, but let's have that conversation with the Mayor, and in fairness to him, he needs to have conversations with his own council as well as to what their position would be. But I'm sure that given the way that we're working together, there's a joint desire from both the council and from the government to make sure we genuinely do a very objective, independent review of what's happened.
So just in regards to the Marae Fund, if you could just tell me a bit about how that might be delegated, and maybe elaborating in Ms. Mitchell about your experience on the ground at those marae.
Yeah, look, one of the real standouts of this response was marae. Mark and I spent some time up in Northland, particularly in say, State Highway 35 vicinity, and also up in Northland. It was particularly noticeable. They were outstanding. These are very remote, localised, isolated communities, as you're well aware. But the way that they have actually prepared, we met with marae in Northland, and there's a network of 7, for example, that has been very professionally managed and set up on elevated ground with resources and containers for emergency disaster like this. And that's what I mean, our response is getting better, but marae deserve tremendous credit. I just want to make sure they have depleted their resources, and I want to make sure that actually, and they've done an outstanding job, I want us to make sure that we are replenishing those as quickly as possible.
Will their allocation, sorry.
I'll let Mark. I was just going to say, you asked for my observation. It's quite simply that over the last 2 years, so we're now at about 24 local states of emergency. Iwi are very good at emergency management, without a doubt, and they always step forward for the entire community, and they're able to provide facilities and support that is often required when people need it most. It's not just iwi that stand up, it's community groups. We saw that through this one. We had lots of organised community groups in isolated communities that stood up and provided support. Our rural sector and rural community are also very good at emergency management. They also stand up and provide an enormous amount of support. And, you'll hear me say, and I believe it having been involved in it now on a steep learning curve for the last 2 years, the best response is a whole of society, whole of community.
And I'd just add that our budget decisions have reflected the growing role of marae as community hubs following natural disasters. You saw us, after Cyclone Gabrielle, allocate significant funds, including for the relocation of marae, so they were more resilient and safer in future. More recently, we have made funds available for the Regional Infrastructure Fund, for the rebuild of a marae in Opotiki, and rebuilding community facilities in Ratana. We recognise this is vital community resilience infrastructure.
And it is impressive, we've got solar panels on, we've got batteries, there's been a real upgrade, but they are exactly like I said, community hubs, and the teams have done an outstanding job.
Prime Minister, how did you land on 1.2 million as your contribution to the mayoral relief funds? Because considering the scale of the devastation conversation, it seems quite small.
Well, I want to be very clear, and I'll ask Nicola to talk to the funding piece of it, because I think it's very important everybody understands it. This is just about immediate money getting straight out to those 5 councils, essentially, or 5 groups, regions, and quickly getting cash dispersed to immediate needs that people have, practical needs of food and other things. So this is an immediate top up to the mayoral fund spends and budgets that we already have, but there is clearly a need for us to spend a lot more on investment alongside with councils going forward. And as I've said, what we're not in the business of is just creating a $6 billion resilience fund and saying we'll just borrow that money for the future. We want to run it through our existing processes, and we have set budgets up and funds up that actually can deal with events like this. Maybe Nicola, if you want to talk to it, just so, because I do want everybody to get a very clear understanding that this is, don't misunderstand the top up of mayoral funds, which is a very tactical, practical, immediate a piece of funding. That is not the be-all and end-all here, of course.
Yeah, look, the key point is that there are hundreds of millions of dollars available across government for responding to this event. So we can envisage, for example, that there will be significant work needed to repair and replace roads. Our government policy statement on transport specifically allocated funds for the rebuild of roads following natural disasters. There is more than $400 million available for the rebuild of state highways, more than $300 million available for local roads that need to be rebuilt following disasters. And so there are some of those funds available to be allocated once NZTA have done the assessment. So we can envisage significant investment coming out of NZTA. In addition, when you think about individual households and homeowners who've been affected by landslides, storm damage, flooding, the Natural Hazards Commission provide insurance cover following these events and have considerable funds put aside for the purpose of providing claim response. We've already had 140 claims to the Natural Hazards Commission. They have sped up their assessment process considerably following Cyclone Gabrielle and the lessons that were learned there. They will play an important part in the response. Additional to that, across government, we have made resilience a core part of our funding priorities. So we already have budget allocation for the temporary accommodation services. Those are already up and running because the funding was already there, and they're there to ensure that people have been displaced from their home not only a help to find accommodation but receive a subsidy for that accommodation. The Ministry for Social Development already have funds budgeted to provide response to those in immediate financial hardship. So the point to make here is that the Mayoral Relief Fund is a drop in the ocean. That's just putting cash in local bank accounts to ensure that voluntary efforts aren't stopped for lack of resource. But in addition, the government can anticipate investing significant amounts of money helping these communities recover.
The different pots of money that you reference at the top, Prime Minister, about 1.5 billion there. How much of this do you foresee needing to use in response to?
It's way too early for us to say at the moment. We've still got 5 regions that have got local states of emergency, so in theory they're still in the response phase. Having said that, we've met with the mayors, we've talked with the mayors, Mark has been in constant contact with them and their CEOs as well. We've got ongoing meetings that have already happened this morning between regions and between the government as to what they think those needs may be shaping up to. We can't give you a number yet, but suffice to say I wanted to reassure you that there is funding aside, there is plenty of money here to actually do the job that we need to do to stand with these communities, but we also want to make sure we are. It's all about execution now. We've had a fantastic response, sadly, to this event. Everyone has worked together well. I'm very proud of the join up. I'm proud of the way that everyone is operating in a much smarter, better way than we were historically. We're getting better and better, as I say, to the response. But now we've got to be really excellent at getting recovery. Sometimes it took us too long to respond to Gabrielle. For a number of reasons. I thought the way it was structured at the very beginning, and that's why I want to make sure we're working with councils directly.
That Marae funding, will that make them...
Sorry?
With that Marae funding, the $1 million, will that make them whole? And if it doesn't, will you top that up?
Our assessment is that it definitely, based on the money that's been expended over this event, that will certainly help and
cover their total
I
costs.
imagine so.
Again, the Te Pōnu Kōkiri already have budget allocated funds to support Marae and community response, so this tops up that fund, but they have some discretionary funds available as well.
The 2.2 announced today, 2.2 million, where is that coming from?
The between budget contingency, so the government, as part of our prudent budget management, always sets aside funds that are available for events that transpire after the budget and throughout the year, and I can advise that we still have funding left in that between budget contingency. It's also possible over the coming weeks that we would make allocations against this year's budget allowance, 2026 budget allowance, although, as I say, there is still funds remaining in the between budget contingency.
We'll take 2 more questions, guys, because I'm just conscious you want to get to the tiles. Yeah.
Are there going to be specific supports available to those who have lost family members in this?
Look, I'll let Mark talk to that.
Sorry, what was it? Can you repeat the question?
Specific supports available to those who have lost family members in this?
Yeah, I mean, first of all, I just want to acknowledge the police officers that have been supporting the families. They are very experienced at this. Several of them were with the families and continue to support the families from Whakaari, White Island. And talking to the Prime Minister and I, talking to the families in the last few days, said that they feel like those police officers are part of their family. And there'll be ongoing support for them, whatever they may need, whether it be psychological support. Obviously, they're getting support on the ground in terms of finding housing and making sure that they're actually being looked after. So yes, of course, there'll be ongoing support for the families.
You talked about timing. You wanted to make sure the inquiry didn't take too long, but answers came quickly. Would you envision that answers becomes well before the end of the year, no matter what kind of...
Look, I mean, in fairness, I want to make sure we've got a bit like we approached the Tom Phillips inquiry. We took our time. We're very prudent, very sensible about it, worked our way through very well-defined terms of reference. I want to make sure we do exactly the same here, so I can't, unfortunately, give you a timing. But obviously, there's a desire. It's about how well it's crafted at the beginning, how well framed are the terms of reference that'll ultimately determine the timing here.
Did you consider putting Chris Peck in cabinet to be able to really take this role forward?
Look, as I've said to you, I will make changes around my cabinet and my team as needed in the future, and I don't feel any compunction to do it at certain set times of the year. But Chris Peck's been an outstanding minister. He's done an exceptionally good job on building and construction. There is some adjacency to the tasks that he has here that I'm asking him to do about execution and making sure things get out into the regions. But he can do the job very effectively from where he sits.
Sorry, finally, Minister Willis, is there $1 billion US in the New Zealand Treasury to spend on joining the Trump or the US Board of Peace? Or is that something that just can't be envisioned at this time?
Look, I haven't been advised on that matter, so when I have, I'll be happy to answer your questions.
Okay, I think we're going to stop, guys, because we need to get to the Parliament. Thanks so much.